Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of the Cortright Cast, a podcast where you can get all your needs covered when it comes to pop culture, movies, general entertainment, specifically science fiction, fantasy, anything under the sun in the Hollywood realm, really, as well as books and stories and anything else we feel like talking about, because this is our show. I'm Alex Cortright, and I am with my brother Jonathan Cortright, and we are your hosts. This is episode 5, and today we've got a few things on the agenda. We're talking about Static Shock, new movie being produced by Michael B. Jordan, Furiosa casting, the prequel to the Mad Max Fury Road that George Miller did a few years back. That wasn't even a few years ago. That was a long time ago.
5 years.
It's only been 5 years? Mm-hmm. I feel like it's been a long time. We're also talking about the new Blade Runner TV show slated for, I believe, 2021. And then we're also going to get into some book talk like Brandon Sanderson's The Rhythm of War, upcoming November 17th, I guess, and some of the interesting marketing trends that he's been picking up. And then we also have Christopher Paolini's new To Sleep in a Sea of Stars movie that he just announced the other week. After that, we're going to jump into some book talk with some classics. One classic, Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. Yeah. Karamazov.
It's the length of like 8 normal books, though.
Yeah, so it's book. It actually probably is listed as books because back then they released them that way. So anyway, and before we get into it, if you're not always in possession of the time to sit down for the hour-long podcast, feel free to subscribe to our second channel where all of the short form clips from this podcast go up. It's called Cortright Clips. Easy to type in. Cortright Clips, just like my last name, Alex Cortright.
It's also similar to my last name.
That's your last name too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Makes it easy.
Yeah, that does make it easy. So anyway, we're going to jump right into it and talk about the new Static Shock information that has come out. Now, DC actually announced this movie was going to be made this summer, like maybe 2 or 3 months ago, when they did that. I think it was the virtual event. Mm-hmm. But that virtual event, I believe they just were like, yeah, we're making this movie. However, it's only been in the past like 2 weeks, I guess, that they've announced that Michael B. Jordan has been attached to the project. And I think it's a really interesting announcement because, you know, people don't always get excited for DC news just because they're not always hitting. They don't always really hit the mark. And so I feel like there's not a ton of enthusiasm for their franchise as a whole often. And while the news of a movie for Static Shock would get me somewhat excited, the idea of attaching Michael B. Jordan to it as the producer, I think adds a really interesting dynamic and kind of brings it up the scale in regards to at least importance. So
I'd like them to attach Michael B. Jordan as the main actor.
That was what I thought.
When I heard Michael B. Jordan's Static Shock, I just went like, oh, he's playing Static Shock.
Yeah.
And I went
like,
be
nice?
Well, that's perfect. And then I saw somebody like Photoshop Jaden Smith on Static Shock, and I was just like, huh.
I've seen that.
Not sure about that.
Yeah, that would be nice. But I wonder if Michael B. Jordan is more interested in moving into more producer type roles.
I guess he's also too old. I mean, It's been a really long time since I saw the Static Shock cartoon, but wasn't he like...
Yeah, it's like a teenager story. But I think that the Static Shock story is a really interesting one because, you know, they've been talking about these DC movies for a long time. They've announced like all sorts of places that they want to go. But Static Shock is actually, maybe this is just me, but it's one of the first properties that I've been like, oh, wait, no, I want that. Like, I want that. Mm-hmm. And I think that actually gives it a little steam. I don't feel like I'm alone here. I feel like that gives it a little steam heading into things because, you know, if you grew up at least around the time that I did, Static Shock, I can't say that it was like the most popular show, but it grew a really cult following. And like, I remember it would always come on TV and we were always like this was like before even the internet and stuff, where we didn't have as much access to it. And we were like trying to figure out when it was coming on. We were like, what days, what time does it come on? When can we watch it? Oh, we missed these episodes. What's going on? It was like a show that I was just really interested in and really loved. And I feel like there weren't a lot of shows like that at that time, especially, you know, harnessing the power that Static Shock did. And then after the show went off, it just fell off. No one talked about it. No one ever really heard about it anymore. It just had its little cult following just sitting there. So like, I'm excited for this just because I feel like they're finally doing something that like has more heart to it. It's not just like, oh, we just want superhero franchises so we can get Justice League. It's like, oh wait, no, like I don't care if you do Static Shock and add him to the Justice League. I don't want anything to do with that. Just give me the character. I want that.
DC's in a really weird spot right now too, where I think they're doing the right thing with stuff like Joker and the Batman, which the Joker wasn't that great, I don't think. But I think the type of movie that it wanted to be is a good idea for them. Like just that totally separate.
Yeah, it's
different type movie. Not related to anything else, just totally on its own. I think that's a good idea for them. I think they're going to do a similar thing with the Batman, which I'm excited for, if that can be hopefully better than Joker. But they're kind of in a weird spot where like they're doing these movies, but they're also like they're releasing the Snyder cut of Justice League. Like they're still going back to what failed really hard. And I think they need to move forward with solo movies more so than team up movies.
Yeah, it's
because
like,
their team up movies just
it's like
really
they're caught
didn't
between.
work.
It's like I like some of the ideas they're getting, but they're only just grasping at the straws and they're not really committing yet. Whereas I feel like right now they're trying to put their hands in two different baskets: the Marvel Avengers basket of like we want this like massive universe of blockbuster films that are going to make us all this money, and then also these like solo artistic films that are more conceptual that may or may not do really well. Probably could do really well if they would commit to them and really make them something masterful.
Right.
But they I feel like they need to choose, because I don't really want to like see a DC universe and then also just random DC movies coming out at other times. And I feel like the division of the resources is going to diminish the product on both sides.
Yeah, it's like we really don't need Ben Affleck and Robert Pattinson playing Batman at the same time.
That, and people are just going to get confused. Like people that aren't like movie buffs or like really into the comics and the...
I've seen people saying that like the Batman and Joker are going to be connected, and I'm like, I don't buy that. I don't think that that's going to happen.
I just don't know that it's hard, because I understand from their point of view that DC is like, we need to make money like Avengers did. That's really all they want. Like from the top down, they're just like, we need to make money like Avengers did. And that being said, I'm not sure that the solo movies could reach that. So it's a matter of kind of finagling the business side as well as the artistic side. And I don't know that there's a perfect balance.
Well, I mean, Joker was incredibly successful box office wise. I think it become the highest grossing R-rated movie. Yeah. I thought it beat out Deadpool.
Yes.
It was incredibly successful on that front. And I think the Batman's going to be extremely successful too.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will be. I think if you slap Batman on anything, it's going to be at least mildly successful.
Yeah.
But it does make me wonder, like, what we still got Wonder Woman. What's it called? Wonder Woman
1984, yeah.
Coming out next year, or is it December?
It was supposed to be like 7 times this
year. I can't remember where they moved it.
They've moved it 7 times. It's coming out sometime.
It's coming out sometime. But they've still got that going. So it's like they haven't ditched the DCEU, but I also don't think Ben Affleck's doing another Batman movie.
Yeah, it's
and
confusing.
I know Henry Cavill wants to do another Superman movie, but it doesn't seem to be anywhere in sight.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what's going on?
Their whole thing is just confusing.
Isn't there supposed to be a Green Lantern movie coming out?
I heard
a rumor that like John David Washington might be cast as Green Lantern.
I think it's in the very
I like
formative stages.
But it's like they're stuck in such a weird spot where they're about to release the Snyder cut of Justice League, which is supposed to show off all this stuff that was cut out of Justice League. Does that make it canon though? If they continue forward, it wasn't in the movie.
Yeah,
you know,
it's going to be really confusing. And while I like some of the newer ideas that they're coming up with, like the Batman, like going in the direction of something like the Joker, some of these other, a Static Shock movie, I'm interested in that. But I have to wonder if it doesn't, like, I think the strongest thing that Marvel did wasn't coming up with the idea of being like, we're going to pull all these superheroes together over 10 years and it'll culminate in these awesome superhero team up movies. What really made that work wasn't just the idea of doing it. You can come up with a good idea any day and make your own superheroes. What really like drove that nail home was the fact that they had a vision And it was so laser focused, and they strove towards that vision for 10 years straight. And then they started to reap the rewards. Obviously, they made some money along the way, but like they never strayed from that path, even though now it looks like a tried and true, like totally corporatized, like business model. Theoretically, back when they were doing it, it wasn't like it was like, oh, yeah, this is going to make you millions and millions of dollars. It was like they're trying to do something that sounds really cool. It was visionary at the time.
Yeah. And even though it's become a business model, none of them have been successful. Out of the ones that have tried to do a universe,
different franchises have been successful.
Amazing Spider-Man 2 tried to set up a universe and failed. The Tom Cruise Mummy movie, let's not forget about that, was originally supposed to set up a dark universe.
They're still fiddling with the Godzilla, King Kong stuff too.
They're still trying to do that, and
just doesn't seem like it's going anywhere.
I mean, and then DCEU is the only one that's really had like a team up movie. And still, they were really struggling to get there.
Yeah.
After Batman v Superman, I mean, with the critical reception and how poorly it did box office wise, it should have gone the way of Amazing Spider-Man. They kind of hung in there for Justice League, and then they're stuck in such a weird spot. And it's Wonder Woman's going to be successful.
Yeah.
The first one was successful. This new one's going to be successful. But what are they going to do after that? Like, I think they should go for more of the solo movies. I think that's their best bet.
Yeah, and it's kind of surprising that they haven't given it up yet, because it's like they tried to do it in Batman v Superman, didn't work. Then they tried to do it. They were like we can salvage this, and then they did Justice League, and now they've even tried. They did Suicide Squad, bombed horribly. Yeah. After that, they were like, we can salvage some of what's left. Let's do Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey. Absolute dumpster fire. And even still, they're still like talking about Suicide Squad related properties, all sorts of things like that. That it's like, dude, they have the properties. They have the properties. I mean, people genuinely love their superheroes. They have the properties. If they can just learn to manage them properly, they can knock it out of the park. And I want to see it so bad. But until I don't think that they're going to see massive success. They might have little successes here and there, like Joker, like the Batman, maybe. But I don't think they're going to see success on a large scale until they can get that laser focus, until they pick one thing and do it fantastically, consistently over the course of 5 to 10 years. Until then, I think you just might have like an okay movie here and there.
I'm excited for the Batman, but they need to lay off Batman in terms of like how many people have played Batman so far? You've got Michael Keaton, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, Christian Bale, Ben Affleck, and then Robert Pattinson, all like back to back now. And they need to lay off Batman.
Yeah,
like, it's a great property, and if they can do well with it, that's cool. But they are sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah.
They've got Green Lantern, who they have not touched since they destroyed him with Ryan Reynolds. And they're sitting on so much. They still can't figure out what to do with Superman. That was really the genius of Marvel, is that they figured out what to do with all the heroes that people weren't really familiar with or didn't really care about. Like, who was that familiar with Captain America before?
Or Iron Man.
MCU. Yeah. or Thor, who actually DC actually has more interest in their characters. Superman and Batman were bigger characters than any of the MCU characters were prior. And DC's sitting on this gold mine of characters that they just can't figure out what to do with.
Yeah, it's a shame. But hopefully, that being said, hopefully the Static Shock movie can kind of push them in the right direction. I would love to see a series of just Static Shock films. Just standalones. Not standalones, but like not really branching into a wider universe, just do like 3, like a trilogy of Static Shock films. And I think something like that being incredibly popular would boost their morale so much and really give them some properties to start standing on. Because I mean, like, honestly, I think Static Shock could be a more valuable property than like Black Panther, with both the cultural impact and like just their ability to pull it off. Like, I think that if they did it right, and with someone like Michael B. Jordan, who I think has good artistic direction and a good head on his shoulders, I think that they could really make it something. Because like Black Panther was okay, but it was more like this is all we have. This is all we've ever gotten. We're excited. Whereas like I'm like, well, actually, you could still do a lot better. Like, so I think if they did that, I think that would give them a property to start building on. But anyway, moving forward, Furiosa. I believe that is maybe it might not, I don't know if it's going to be the actual title of the film, because I've also seen the title Mad Max The Wasteland. I don't know. A little bit confusing and further down the road, but some casting rumors have come out, and I don't think they're rumors actually. I think they were confirmed that Anya Taylor-Joy would be playing a younger version of Furiosa in a Mad Max prequel. Now, previously, George Miller had spoken about doing another Mad Max movie, and I don't think he had decided if he was going to do a prequel or a sequel. And he had said that he was not going to put a movie into production if he didn't have a good story that he was comfortable with. Now, George Miller as a director, I genuinely kind of trust to know what he's doing. That being said, I'm a little bit skeptical of the decision in general to move forward with a prequel. Just because, like, at what point are prequels proven to not work? Like, can we name a prequel that like really just knocked that out of the park? Like, people keep using it as oh, well, we don't know what to do. We could do a prequel, or there's probably a good story back here. We could do a prequel, but no matter how good the idea is, when has it worked?
Yeah. I always want to like prequels. I always want to like the idea of expanding on it. I think that they are, at this point, just almost proven not to work.
Yeah,
however, if they're doing a prequel, I think doing a prequel that is very focused on one character and very separate is the way to do it. The trap that a lot of prequels fall into is they do that thing where they make sure to set up everything that happens in the movies that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Like Solo, they made sure that everything about Han Solo that is mentioned in A New Hope was explained. Oh, cool. He made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. Well, we're going to show you him making the Kessel Run. We're going to show you how he got his name. It's just like all these things. And it's like every prequel, or most prequels, fall into that trap. Like, I don't think you've seen the movie The Thing.
No.
But the prequel to it, which is also called The Thing, in the original Thing, they go to this base where it's been destroyed and everybody's been murdered. So what the prequel to Thing does is it shows you what happened at that base, and so every bit that you've seen from The Thing, they show you how it all got there, and it's just like you already know what's going to happen at the end.
Yeah,
you know the axe is going in this door. You know everything if you've seen it. I don't know that Furiosa is going to have that trouble though. Like, I don't know if it's going to fall into that trap because there's not going to be much to do there if they went that route.
Yeah,
so they might be more successful with that.
The strengths that George Miller has is the fact that the Mad Max, while Mad Max has been a franchise for a while, the Mad Max that he did kind of was like just nebulous. It was like this kind of random story with it was a very isolated story with isolated events. And so he's not really relying on a gigantic sprawling lore. Mm-hmm. So there is room to just go far back. Now, clearly, because supposedly it's titled Furiosa, they have cast Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa, whereas Charlize Theron was the one who played her in Fury Road. But the other question is, how much do we care about Furiosa as a character when not embodied by Charlize Theron? Like, she really, like, you can have your opinions about Charlize Theron. You might not enjoy her in other movies or whatnot, or like her as a person, I don't know. But when it comes to that movie, she was a large part of that movie. Like, obviously Tom Hardy was in the movie and he played a big part of it, but she was almost more of the main character than he was. Mm-hmm. Like, he didn't have much dialogue. He had hardly any character. So obviously I think that she is the one with a character lore that you could go back and find some interesting things with. But I really felt like Charlize Theron embodied that character so well, and the visuals of that character were so iconic that it makes me like, well, casting someone else makes it cuts itself off from the original movie, and it distances itself from the original movie almost too much for me. Now, I have seen that on IMDb, it's hard to trust or tell right now because it's far enough out that it's not even in production yet. But I believe Tom Hardy is still listed on the IMDb for this new movie. So I don't know if he would be a part of it. That's kind of a tough one to tell.
Mad Max is it's a bizarre property because there were 3 Mad Max movies prior to Fury Road. And the first one is not good. And they were all done by George Miller.
All of them, really?
I believe all 3 of them were done by George Miller prior to Fury Road. But, I mean, the first one came out in, like, 1979. It was like his first movie. It was really low budget. It was like a really low budget B movie with Mel Gibson. It's not that good. It's really boring. It takes about an hour and a half for Mad Max to actually get mad and do something. It's really boring. Mad Max 2 is a lot more like Fury Road. It's a lot more car chase focused, and it's a lot cooler. Mad Max 3, I think it's called Beyond Thunderdome. It's kind of bizarre. And then it just disappeared for a long time. And then they came out with Fury Road. And that one was like, that's the one Mad Max movie everybody gets on board with, and they're like, that was really good.
Yeah.
Some people like the old ones, but that's the one where they're like, this is really good.
It's like the whole situation around it is just kind of strange.
It's just a bizarre property. It's like George Miller just keeps like letting it go for a little while and then coming back with some like random new idea.
Mm-hmm. I have heard that also Chris Hemsworth is getting attached to this project. So I'm really not sure where they're going to go with it. I do think there is a story to tell. It's just not having Charlize Theron attached as well as it being a prequel makes me like, is that a good idea?
I think Anya Taylor-Joy is a good choice, though. I think she's a really good up-and-coming actor. She's really young.
Incredibly young, yeah.
Like early 20s. But she was good in Split. She's good in Thoroughbreds. I think she's picking up a lot of steam in Hollywood right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think she's a bad choice for Furiosa. And I'm not, if they're going with the prequel movie, I don't think that's a bad option to go with Furiosa, because I don't think anybody was like, after Fury Road, what we really want is more silent Tom Hardy.
Yeah,
we really need to know
or
about
even just what comes next.
Yeah.
I don't recall being like, what about
we need to see Tom
two?
Hardy when he was silent, but when he was younger.
Yeah. Well, I definitely wouldn't want a prequel of Tom Hardy to begin with, or just a prequel in general. And I don't recall being like, what's coming next?
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, it's pretty far out.
Fury Road was such a car chase movie too. Like,
yeah,
the whole movie was a car chase.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it does make me wonder like what they're gonna do with Furiosa.
Yeah, and it really is too early to say, because I mean we're just talking about casting. I don't even know if a lot of this is official. I think obviously Anya Taylor-Joy is. Chris Hemsworth they've talked about, but they're not really releasing characters. They're not releasing anything about plots. I don't know if the script is even written yet. So we'll just have to see how that develops. But so I have heard that there is a Blade Runner TV show that is in the works. I've heard that it's going to be Japanese anime and a sort of co-handled between Crunchyroll and I believe Adult Swim. And I honestly wasn't even sure what to think about that when I read that, because I feel like it's a little bit confusing, because the last thing I would have thought of was to go animated with Blade Runner. And I believe it's called Blade Runner Black Lotus. And I can't remember if it's slated for like 2021 or something like that. But I feel like it'll definitely be interesting and worth checking out for people like us who might be interested in, the deeper lore of things like that, or big Blade Runner fans. But I have to question, like, at what point do we get too far removed from the actual original vision of Blade Runner? Like, Blade Runner was originally a Philip K. Dick novel. It wasn't even called Blade Runner. Then Ridley Scott took it and made it something completely different. And that was successful. Then it sat and nothing happened to it for years. And then we got Blade Runner 2049. That was a great movie. However, it didn't do that well at all. Well, which I think may have, I wouldn't say proved, but it didn't do that well at all. And I think what it did show was that there isn't exactly like a burning appetite for Blade Runner as a property. And I feel like doing more Blade Runner from now on like the whole idea behind using Blade Runner as your IP is to bring in those fans, to keep that lore, to keep that world. And the further we get from the original property, I'm wondering, like, it'd be different if like Blade Runner 29 was massive and they're like, now we're making this big new franchise and we're going to build out the world and do animated shows and more movies and things like that. But it's like, I mean, I feel like that series as a whole is kind of dead in the water right now. Like,
well, I mean, it was dead in the water before 2049 came out. I mean, Blade Runner was an incredibly unsuccessful movie. The original, like critically, it was panned. Box office wise, it lost Ridley Scott. Aliens, like Ridley Scott did Alien, and that was so successful. That's how he got to do Blade Runner. They did Blade Runner, and it was such a bomb that they brought James Cameron in to do Aliens and didn't even ask Ridley Scott to come back. I think Ridley Scott said that movie almost destroyed his career. Because it was such a big budget movie and it was such a flop.
So it was,
and then Blade Runner 2049 comes around and it's kind of a similar thing. It got much better critical reception on release, but it's still, I don't think that Blade Runner has the following to generate much box office.
So why are we returning to it though?
That's because it also does have a huge cult following.
But I mean, is it enough to bring in the returns that these studios need? I
don't think so. I think Blade Runner is an attractive property though. Like it's very sleek. There's a lot that you can do with it. And there are a lot of people that really like it. But I mean, it took like 15 years for Blade Runner to even develop a cult following.
Yeah.
It took until like the director's cut was released for people to even really get into it. And I don't see a Blade Runner, any sort of Blade Runner property being hugely successful. I could see it being moderately successful.
So I guess my question isn't, like, obviously me as someone who is a big fan of Philip K. Dick, as well as Blade Runner 2049 and the original Blade Runner, like I like Blade Runner a lot. I'm very interested in anything Blade Runner. It's not me I'm not saying like I don't want the show. I have to go, like, I have to think about these studio executives and be like, what is it that makes it an enticing property to them? Like what makes them think like, oh, we can make money with this when it keeps being proven that they can't.
Right. Well, Blade Runner's also been a huge influence on much of sci-fi, much of the science fiction tropes we get in movies. Mm-hmm. Now, anyway, I mean, it was a trendsetter, despite not being successful. So I think in some way there's the idea that they could capitalize on it. But I mean, if when you get somebody like Denis Villeneuve to do a movie and it's as good as 2049 was, and it's still not successful, I'm just not sure you're gonna get that. Like, I don't think anybody's like, I really want a Blade Runner anime show. You know, I'm not sure there's going to be that appetite for it. I'm interested in it though.
Yeah,
I'm interested to see it.
I mean,
I'm going to make a bet that it's only going to last one season though. I kind of feel like it's going to be
I could see that
one season thing.
I mean, that being said, on the flip side, looking at it from another point of view, I actually could see an animated show being a better avenue for that world. I could see almost starting from the ground up within the world and being able to build something out that would work better on the animated medium than the big screen. So
yeah, I do wonder what approach they're gonna have with it, because Blade Runner 1 and 2 basically both tackled similar questions, and even the book it was about, you know, what's human, mm-hmm. and what does that mean. It makes me wonder if the anime show is gonna more capitalize on the world of Blade Runner than being specifically true to Blade Runner.
I've heard that it's supposed to take place like 13 years before 2049. Okay. So I really think they're just gonna try and use the world. I feel like they would do like nods to some of the story elements and characters, but I don't think that.
I don't know that it's gonna be that great if they just use the world. I feel like they need to dig a little bit into Philip K. Dick's themes, because if you just take the Blade Runner world, it's a cool looking world, but it's no longer original. Like, I don't think that a Blade Runner's world is a whole lot different from most sci-fi
at this point
dystopian worlds. Because I mean it set the stage for so many other sci-fi thing. So I think digging into that world is not as interesting as it would have been like 30 years ago.
Yeah. So. I think it'll be interesting to see. And like I said, I mean, hopefully, I think it's probably still another year or two out. So we'll see where it goes. But I'm excited because I have to say, like, I love Blade Runner as a property. So I'm excited for that. So moving out of the Hollywood realm and into the book realm, because we don't talk about books enough on this podcast, The Rhythm of War comes out November 17th. And if you're unfamiliar, it's Brandon Sanderson's fourth book in the Stormlight Archive series. And I am a big fan of the series. I know you're not particularly familiar with it, so you're not going to have nearly as much to say on it. But, I don't actually want to talk about the book itself because I'm excited for the book. I think it's going to be good. Brandon Sanderson is a complete maverick in the space, and I have a lot of respect for him and the work that he does in the books. And I talk about that all the time on this YouTube channel. But what I think is a really interesting thing to talk about here is that in the past, I guess, few months, Sanderson has really taken a new angle at trying to connect with fans and utilize the YouTube content new age of media space in a way that I feel like a lot of other authors, especially bigger authors, have struggled to do. And he's always been kind of internet savvy. He's always really done a good job of connecting with fans and sending out newsletters and keeping them up to date with what's going on. But in the past few months, there's been a concerted effort to really build up almost like an independent online following. He had a YouTube channel where he was just uploading lectures. You've seen those. He was just uploading like his college lectures on writing. But he recently started doing like a month or two ago. No, it was probably longer than that. It was probably like 3 or 4 months ago. These live streams every Thursday night where he would take questions while he was just signing. Like, he has a lot of books that go out to be signed and stuff, and they have like all sorts of different new releases and paperback releases and special editions, and he would just be signing them, and he'd just take questions from online. It was super amateur, like stream, like not even super high quality, but people really loved it. And people love connecting with authors and creators, and it's something that I feel like a lot of the younger generations of creators have been good at. In specifically, I think gaming is one of the strongest places in terms of like young creators being able to curate content on a mass scale to their fans. It's something that Hollywood has dipped their toes in. They're not that great at it. They're still so high on their pedestal of money and production that I don't think they do the greatest job of it. But YouTubers in general, just the general genre of YouTubers, I feel like they've really tapped into something in a way of creating content and keeping fans engaged that I feel like tons of other industries can really capitalize on. Most specifically, because it relates to me at least, and my interests, I think that authors and the general writing space has not utilized the internet properly. Yes, we've got like ebooks are popular now, and we've got little dabbles here and there, but I don't feel like anyone's really capitalizing on bringing books to the mainstream. Books are still like, I mean, everyone knows about books. Everyone's read books. You think of it as this massive industry. And yes, it is this tried and true big industry, but if you look at the actual market space that it takes up, it's not that much. Like, book sales are so small, just the numbers of them in comparison to like movie tickets or song downloads or game sales, whatever it is. So what I've thought is really interesting and what I've wanted to see an author do for so long is exactly what Sanderson is doing. And he's stumbling into it. He's not older, but he's not a young buck. He's not like totally internet savvy, but he started uploading these live streams on YouTube. And then he realized that it doesn't just have to be live streams. He can take clips from them and upload them as their own videos, fully thumbnailed, fully titled, with all sorts of topics that his fans and just fans of writing or books in general would want to see. And it's been blowing up. I mean, he got to like 100,000 subscribers in like just a few months. Now, obviously, he had a little bit of, a head start. He's been uploading lectures for a long time, but it really wasn't like a pop in YouTube channel. And he's built it up like this. And I've noticed the genius in his plan. It's not just like something that he randomly came up with, though. I've realized that he's had a plan this whole time when his new book, The Rhythm of War, is coming out, and they've dabbled in things like this in the past with his other books, but his books are so long. These books are 900 pages long. They've started releasing pieces of the book, like interludes or the first chapter, the prologue, or the first 5 chapters online. I believe they released them online, maybe in like his newsletter earlier on, or on his publisher's website. But just a week or so ago, as we're getting ready for the launch, they released the audiobook version of the first 16 chapters of the book. And as I'm like watching this all unfold, I'm realizing that like this is all a part of a plan. And I just think it's such a interesting and necessary step for authors to move into this space in this way. And I'm watching, this older author kind of stumble his way through it. And I'm like, this is such a big space with so much room to grow and connect to your fans through things like YouTube and these internet avenues. And I think that's such a unique and interesting way. I mean, it's perfectly logical. If you think of other industries, you're like, oh, well, obviously, you should be connecting with your fans. You should be posting on YouTube, creating content, but authors don't do that. And quite frankly, they don't do it that well when they do. Maybe because authors are often like a little more introverted. They're not as interested in, performing for the camera. But I think as industries become more and more competitive, you don't really have the option, or at least you're cutting down your prospects quite a lot by not taking part in that. But I think it's a really interesting thing that he's doing, and the implications for the industry as a whole. I'm really excited to see where authors go with this type of content. I mean, he's not the only one doing that type of thing, but I think he's one of the more successful ones to really lean into that. And I've thought for a while now. I've thought about like what would be a way to, I guess, monetize novels for free or pieces of stories for free. Because if you look at the model for a lot of new industry online it's moving towards free. I mean, like if you look at music, yeah, you might have to pay for Apple Music or Spotify, but nobody's just buying records anymore. Like same thing goes for movies. I mean, everything's going towards subscription services and so forth. And so it's like, how do you capitalize and make a living off of things like writing novels while also moving into the new era of content?
Yeah, I think you've got the way Hollywood tries to do it, which is like try to do it like your grandparents would try to, use new technology. And I think, like, how old's Brandon Sanderson? Like 40 something?
Maybe around 40, yeah, probably.
Yeah. It makes me wonder what like the new generation of authors are going to do with it, because you're moving into a world where like people don't read books the way that they used to. Mm-hmm. And when they read them, typically they're on an iPad. So you're going to have a whole generation of people who came up reading ebooks, and you're going to have a lot of authors come out of that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do with it, because they're going to have to move into that market if you want books to survive the way that they are. Yeah,
and that's what I've noticed with what Sanderson's doing. What I see like kind of an early form of this type of content, where I'm like, this is someone who's like coming in, seeing the success of this online market and trying to do something. But I don't feel like he's someone who just endemically understands, the kids these days. I feel like he's doing a really great job of moving into it. But I look at the channel and I'm like, there's so many things you could improve just on the production alone, or the things, and so many ideas. And it's all based on what the author wants to do, what they have time for, what they're motivated to do. But I feel like there's a way. It's like story is everlasting. Story is in everything. It's in video game, it's in movies, it's in everything. Nobody doesn't love story, but theoretically, not a lot of people just read for fun. So like, what can we as like authors and creators do to push story out to wider audiences? Not just like to get more sales within book readers, but like, what can you do to make something like the story of Sanderson's Stormlight Archive reach newer audiences and then also capitalize on the content and the personality of the author to keep fans interested and engaged, to build followings? Because I mean, even if you look at some like older authors that still have bestseller books, you can go find them on Instagram. They've got 300 followers. It's like the entire landscape of what it means to be a successful author is so much different. You know, if you're a streamer, a game streamer or something, like if you're big, you're going to have thousands and thousands of followers on every social media. But like in books, it's different. They're like, oh no, we put your books on the shelf and people will buy them. You know, you don't have to have that. You don't have to do interviews all the time. You don't have to create content. But I feel like with the new world that we're living in, it's a really missed opportunity. And so you see like an older author, not super old, obviously, I'm not calling him old, but like, you know, a less like young hip author like Sanderson, who's doing, you know, high fantasy. And then I look at younger authors like maybe Rebecca Kwong, who does the Poppy War series. And I'm like, I want to see you start a YouTube channel. Right. I want to see ways. And, you know, I've seen her, I follow her pretty closely on social media. And she talks about the books a lot. She's really interesting and funny and witty. And she's been doing like live. And I've noticed authors doing more like Instagram live types of things. But I still don't feel like it's harnessing like what you could really do with content. I think authors are starting to lean into like, oh, I can just go live and answer questions on Instagram. But I'm like, oh, but that could be so much better quality. It could be on YouTube. You could have a beautiful thumbnail and a catchy title, and you could be reaching a new audience, not just satisfying the audience that you have. And I think that I think the room to grow is one of the most exciting and interesting spaces in regards to content these days.
Mm-hmm. There's a whole market that's just not being tapped into right now.
Yeah.
Social media wise.
That, and with authors, you know, authors are having to release more and more often. Like you can't just release one book every 4 to 5 years anymore. You can't, I mean, in order to stay alive, if you're not like a massive author, you need to release a book like every year at this rate lately. Like if you want to really make a living doing it. So it's like, I think that it's not only something that it would be helpful or interesting or exciting for authors to do. I think it's something that's going to be necessary as we move forward into this new era, because you're just not going to be able to get away with doing less.
Right.
Some other news in the book realm that came out just about a week or two ago. Oh, I just flipped my nose right out and squeaked. Some other news that came out about a week or two, I believe, in the book realm is that To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, a book that I've talked about a little bit on this channel by Christopher Paolini, the author of Aragon and the Inheritance Cycle, is getting a movie already. Now, the book just came out like a month ago. So it's really interesting that the book is getting a movie. I assume the book's doing well. You know, he was a bigger author at the time. He really did well. So maybe they're really confident. Obviously, this was a deal. The movie deal that he got was something that that was in the works before the novel even came out. So I think that's a really interesting development. But the news came along with not just the idea that the book is going to get a movie, but that Paolini and his sister, who I believe works really closely with him on a lot of, I guess, the business side, mm-hmm. and even on the writing side, obviously not taking part in the writing, but, you know, a lot of the reading and producing and editing type of things regarding to his work, that they're going to be working on the screenplay together. Paolini has not released a book since, I believe it was like 2013. The Inheritance Cycle finished up a long time ago, and it took him a while to get this new book out. It's a book that's in a different genre. I mean, yes, you know, fantasy and sci-fi are adjacent, but his new novel is like full-on science fiction. Like space opera, you know, fantasy type of vibes. I mean, they kind of blend together the genres to begin with, mm-hmm. but it's a new territory. So the fact that he's already looking into and has the author weight to pull something like a movie deal, I think is really interesting. But I am excited for him because at least he does have the chance to maybe right the wrongs of the Aragon movie that was made. Because, you know, if you're familiar with the movie and the reception of it, it didn't get good reception. It didn't do well at all. And then over the years, Paolini, he made it clear his feelings about the movie, and they weren't positive.
Yeah, you never know with those book deals or those movie deals that happen, like basically when a movie comes out or when a book comes out, you never really know like how soon the movie's actually going to come out after that. Mm-hmm. Because generally those are the types of deals where, I mean, I'm not particularly familiar with what this deal is looking like, but typically those are the deals that happen where like a script will be written and it'll sit there for years.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. Like the author, Dennis Lehane, who his books have been turned into Mystic River and Gone Baby Gone, mm-hmm. Shutter Island. He came out, his last book, came out 3 years ago, and it was announced like the day it released, he had already written the script for the movie, and 3 years later, it hasn't made any progress. So I don't know. I wouldn't see one coming out that soon, though, just because typically when a book comes out like that and the movie's being written kind of alongside its release, it typically sits for a while.
Yeah. And I definitely expect it to sit for a while because I don't think they've even written the script yet. Right. But what I did think was interesting was that's another thing. If you have a book deal or a movie deal in the pipeline, that's fine. But Paolini himself came out on his YouTube channel and has made an entire video addressing it and talking about it. And I was like, that's really early for something that I usually think of like movie deals from authors like that as like things that are kind of like, well, you sold the rights to it and it's going to sit for years and years. But this doesn't seem like that's the case. But I do think it's really interesting though that he is going to be writing the screenplay along with his sister. And I feel a little apprehensive about like, I don't know how I feel about authors writing the screenplays to their novels.
I think it can be good if they're separated enough from it. Because it's right here. It's a pretty big book.
Yeah.
The difference between being a screenwriter and being a novelist is basically knowing how to cut. Knowing how to cut massively. And with him sort of being burned on his first movie adaptation, I wonder if he's going to come into it like a novelist rather than like a screenwriter, which may not be for the best for the movie though.
Yeah. But now on the other hand, I think one of the interesting things as I've actually just finished reading the book this week, and I've done a whole review for it. It's coming out this week on my YouTube channel. But one of the interesting things about this book that I thought after hearing the news about a movie is that I actually think a movie of this story would be better than the novel form. I think if they get the budget for it. I think it's all about budget because obviously it's a big space opera and there's a lot of spectacle to it. But that being said, it's a 900-page book. It's a very condensed story, though. It is a single point of view story and is essentially just a gigantic adventure through space that's written with a lot of words, and a lot of things happen, but it's not like some massive, like multi-sided story with all sorts of politics and intrigue. It's very much like adventure through space, almost to the point of like a lot of the events of the book, while they did a lot to maybe bolster the characters and the general development of some of the story elements made them stronger. They weren't that necessary often. And it often felt like we were just meandering from adventure to adventure. And I'm not saying that a movie itself would be even great, but I think the actual medium of a movie would fit better with the ideas in his book, because the book itself is very spectacle based often, and that it's about, this girl finding Xeno. It's like a alien that like attaches itself to her body and forms a suit around her. It's like this advanced technology that makes her kind of like super powered as a suit. And he does interesting things with it. The book is kind of a love letter to science fiction. He literally says that in interviews, almost to a fault. Like it feels like he's like, and because I love Alien, we're going to have this thing like jump out and go through someone's stomach type of stuff.
Yeah.
And because I like this, it honestly feels like at points, it feels like kind of robotically, like he's just like trying to throw in little bits and tropes. And he does a good job subverting things and making it his own as a whole. But that being said, some of the spectacle of like a kind of super powered girl in space with like a Xeno suit that like shoots like tentacles and spikes out of itself. And like, it's very made for the big screen. I feel like space, like ships, planets, magic, different species that are terrifying. They've got tentacles, like even the final set piece feels like a set piece. It feels like I'm watching the end of an Avengers movie when I was reading it. So I think that there's actually more room for it to be a better movie than a book possibly. And I think that condensing it for a movie into something a lot smaller might be better for the story. So it'll be interesting. And I have to root for him though, because he really did they did him dirty with Aragon, dude. Like that was a hard time. But that being said, we have been reading The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a topic that I've kind of thought about for a few weeks because I have really mixed feelings about it. So to set the stage for viewers, we decided to have a little, one-off reading club and try and read this classic together in tandem, 1 or 2 chapters a week, really. I mean, like not even reading that much, just to really try and take a look at a classic that I've heard so much about. I've always heard things like Dostoevsky is like a top 10 greatest author of all time. Just absolutely like stands above the rest, like so brilliant. And clearly he deserves a good deal of praise. When I read his works and I see the impact that it's had, I don't deny that. But we haven't, the trick here is that we haven't finished the book at all. We're like 200 pages into the book. And so normally I wouldn't even want to talk about it without having finished the book. But I find myself wondering if I even want to finish it at all. And you'll have to answer this because we've not talked about this at all before doing this podcast. But I found myself, as I'm reading through this, obviously there's going to be elements to the writing that are very dated and hard to, it can be hard to read. It's a thick book. But my question is, like, at what point are the classics not as good as they once were? Because this is a classic novel from a classic author. But I find myself, and you can respond to this because it's really a question. I find myself, as I'm reading it, criticizing so much of the way in which it's written based on current advice and theory about writing and just general ways in which new books are written. And this book does so many things wrong on that front that it makes it hard for me to really be engaged by, because I know writing was different back then and the standards were different. But at what point are the classics, at what point do they not hold up? Because yes, there's some great ideas in this book. There's some great philosophical ideas and conversations to be had around the things that happen in the book. But the way in which it's written, like, are we supposed to just slog through it to get through to the good soul food of it in the great philosophical thoughts that Dostoevsky had? Or, like, is it actually not good anymore?
I think it's hard in today's world with so much information and so much media at your fingertips. What you do, you have to think, or what you spend your time on, you have to think that you're getting value out of it. And this book is, it's like 800 pages.
Yeah.
To read through an 800-page book that moves very, very slowly.
Incredibly small time too. You say 800 pages. It is.
It's a long book. And to really read through it, you got to think, or to spend your time reading it, you got to think that you're getting value from it. And in today's world, I think you see a lot of writing trends and a lot of writing rules developed to keep people's attention. And I don't think that was really around as much when this was written. But also, you know what else wasn't around when this was written? TV, smartphones, movies that are readily available, things that you could spend your time doing that people today probably find more value in. So I think to keep your attention, that's really why those writing rules were developed. And while I think that there is a lot of value to be derived from this book, and there's a lot in there that's really interesting, it's really hard to read as a person who's grown up with, with so much technology and so much media. I mean, I think, I can't remember when this book was written, but over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think probably 100 years ago, I'd be like, Brothers I can't even remember how to pronounce
Karamazov.
it. Karamazov. It's so exciting. It's I'm going to go entertain myself by reading this book because I have no other entertainment outlets. Now I'm like, all right, I'll watch the World Series.
Yeah, I guess my question is, like, is it worth reading now? Because just to go a little bit deeper into some of the problems that I feel like it has, it's like, it's not just like, oh, well, it's a little slower or it's a little more boring. It's that, like, some of the tenets of writing now, like the events that actually happen in the book, like, whereas now you hear a lot of writing advice, they're like, there needs to be tension in every scene. You need to have important things going on. There are all sorts of ways to not just keep the reader's attention, but to make it valuable and to make everything you do count on the page. Not just to keep their attention, but to make the book better with every page. Whereas back then, I'm assuming they didn't have editors in the way that we do now. They didn't have the publishing companies doing the things that they do now. It feels like Dostoevsky was just allowed to just write whatever he wanted and just put it out. And what you get is it just sounds like absolute rambling. And there are some great ideas in what he's saying. Like, some of his characters say really profound thoughts, but we have to slog through so much just complete bore of like, oh, it's just like this person talking to someone in the street, talking about their life, and like random, they're just like, oh yeah, I had tea with this person the other day. Oh yeah, how are they? They're really nice. Okay. It's not a relevant character. It's not a relevant event. And they just go on talking forever. It's so incredibly self-indulgent with all the conversations. The conversations that are had are often about like religion or philosophical concepts. It's like, it's very like stuffy men. Like, you imagine these stuffy guys wearing like suits and ties talking about, the world in complex ways. But it's so self-indulgent that at what point is it really good writing? And at what point is it like someone needed to tell him to cool it a little bit? Because I find myself just reading it and I'm like, man, I don't feel like, how sometimes you can read an older book and be like, well, people have done this over and over since then, so that's why it's not hitting me as hard. Mm-hmm. Like, it was more profound back then. That's not how I feel. It's still just as profound. It's just that the actual story is genuinely not written in a way that is remotely engaging. The prose itself is that's the other thing. The prose is jarringly indulgent on another way, like in the way of words. Like, it's so wordy. It feels like there was no one that like went in line by line. Like, he did not edit this at all. It doesn't feel like Dostoevsky was writing and being like, well, how could I use these words better or condense it? He's like, oh, well, I just wrote words and adverbs willy-nilly wherever I felt like, and now I have a 900-page book that is probably like 500,000 words, honestly, because it's 900 pages, but it is the type is so small. Like, there's so many words on a page that I've had this heresy in my heart for like a few weeks, and I feel so uncomfortable thinking it, but I'm just like, at what point am I like, do I put the book down and go, I don't know that this is worth reading? Because It's a long book, and I don't know that there's too much to be gleaned from it. It's almost like, I never feel like this about any book, but at what point would I be better off just like watching some YouTube videos about it, or listening to reviews or analysis of the novel, or listening to the important bits, if I want to actually get something out of it? Because I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of just reading. Like, we're like 200 pages into the book, which is a lot of words because the type is really small. Like, it's no small feat, 200 pages. And I feel like I've gotten absolutely nothing. The story has gone absolutely nowhere. We've only lived through like a day. There's so many words and so many things, and we've lived through like a day, like a conversation or two.
But don't you think you'd be a lot more interested in it if you didn't have access to so many other stories?
I don't know.
I think if you didn't have access to, like, even if you look at right now, like, we've never been out of the country, but we kind of know what other things look like. We know what other lives are like because we watch movies and we read books, and you're sort of exposed to that. But, take it 100 years ago and you're not as much. So a conversation between two people on the street might be more interesting than it is now. Mm-hmm. I think it was a lot less story focused then than it is now. And I think that's just a product of the times, but it does make it really hard today to read that.
So you're right.
And be interested in it.
And I definitely will give you that. I guess what I can't get away from is the question of, is it worth actually going back and reading? Because I feel like that about a lot of classics and a lot of older things. Like, I often find myself trying to side with the idea of, you need to remember the past. We need to read the classics. We need to understand where we came from in a lot of different ways, both in history, but also in literature and things like that. And I feel like I'm hitting a point where I'm like, is there really a true value that's worth the effort that this is going to take to get through? Like, is it still not just, was it a good back then, but is it still a good book now? Like, if you actually go and read Lord of the Rings now, it's still a great book. Now, obviously it's not quite as old, but the novels they still have all the value. The story is still so great. And yeah, there are some different barriers to the time in which it was written and the style in which it was written, but it's still just so iconic and still has so much value to it. Whereas when I'm reading Dostoevsky, I'm like, what am I trying to get out of this?
Well, I also think that no book is ever going to capture the time and place the way that book could, because that time and place is gone. So I think historically it's interesting because you know, you could write a historical novel today, but it's never going to be the same as something that was written by somebody who lived through the time and was writing about their time and their place. So I think historically they do still have value in that sense. They're almost like time capsule value. So there is that, and that interests me some. It doesn't hold my interest for 800 pages though. Yeah. 800 small worded pages.
Yeah, I feel like saying 800 pages, like I read 800 to 900 page books all the time. Like I don't want anyone to get the impression that like I'm just like, oh, it's too long. It's like I'm ready to read 800, 900 pages books all the time. But like these are 800 pages of the smallest type. So think about your average like normal size type book that would come out these days, like just like a commercial fiction that's 800 pages. 800 pages is probably like 200, 300,000 words maybe. I think Brandon Sanderson does 1,000 page books and they're around 400,000 words, which is a lot. Like that's a lot of words stuffed in there. I feel like this is more. Like I feel like there's one more. And it's not to criticize the length because it's really an epic, but I don't know. I'm struggling to figure out if there's really the value that makes it worth, like when you have so little time in the week, it's like, is there really a value to getting into this? Because I feel like I'm leaning towards no. So, but yeah, definitely an interesting topic and an interesting book that I definitely think has value. And I love reading classics. I don't want to come across like a total heretic on this, but it's something that I found myself like not able to ignore anymore. But anyway, that covers all of today's topics. We're going to get out of here. We hope you guys have enjoyed the podcast. If you like it, leave a like on the video, or if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to the podcast and or YouTube channel because it helps us out a ton. And we've got a new episode coming out every single week. This has been episode 5 of the Cortright cast, and we will see you guys in the next one.